On a cold Halloween night in 1963, 6-year-old Michael Myers brutally murdered his 17-year-old sister, Judith. He was sentenced and locked away for 15 years. But on October 30, 1978, while being transferred for a court date, a 21-year-old Michael Myers steals a car and escapes Smith's Grove. From Dr. Loomis: I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left, no reason, no conscience, no understanding in even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face, and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil. The tale of Halloween in Haddonfield, Illinois, has been told and retold. The night in 1963 that an angelic 6-year-old Michael Myers, dressed in a clown suit, brutally murdered his teenage sister, followed by the night 15 years later, again on Halloween, when he broke out of a mental institution in his famously mutilated William Shatner mask to terrorize the virginal babysitter Laurie Strode, aka Jamie Lee Curtis, in the role that would make her the ultimate scream queen. As Laurie, Curtis has battled the unkillable, silent but single-minded Michael Myers across 7 of the 13 films in John Carpenter's Halloween franchise, including the newest trilogy, a trio of revamped sequels that kicked off in 2018, re-envisioning Laurie's adult life, but still showing her haunted and stalked by the killer. Halloween is famous for lots of reasons. It single-handedly launched the era of the slasher film. It's John Carpenter's breakout film, a low-budget indie that made an astronomical profit and launched his career. It's got one of the most famous film scores and horror themes in history, written by Carpenter himself. It remains an incredibly creepy film, full of lingering and now iconic shots of its killer stalking through idyllic suburbia, biding his time or casually observing his kills. And, most crucially, it introduced us to one of horror's most famous villains, destined to be eternally mentioned in the same breath as Freddy and Jason. Halloween is often credited as being the first example of the slasher subgenre of horror, and for introducing the world to the concept of the final girl, the one girl, usually singled out for her virginal qualities, who gets to survive the cinematic massacre of all her counterparts. Halloween, however, took slashers and final girls mainstream, thanks largely to the magnetism of Jamie Lee Curtis as the canny, if mostly helpless, Laurie Strode. Laurie typified the final girl trope from the start. She was too smart for boys and dressed like a dowdy homemaker, in contrast to the other girls with their trendy fashion and sexual exploration. In other words, she embodied the kind of chaste virtue that ensured her survival. But Curtis managed to pull off this role with a kind of fierce, gleaming shrewdness beneath the passive exterior, and 2 decades later, in her return to the franchise after a long hiatus, she would really throw off the helpless act once and for all. After Halloween 2, Carpenter and Hill had a combined vision for the future of Halloween: turn it into a series of anthology films rather than continuing the story of Michael Myers. As such, Season of the Witch, directed and written by Halloween's production designer Tommy Lee Wallace, has nothing to do with the prior two films apart from recalling a single vague line in the second film about how Sound, October 31st, was a druidic holiday often accompanied by ritual sacrifice. Today, we're used to horror franchises that expand out from their original storylines and go in different directions, thanks to more recent series like Paranormal Activity and The Conjuring. But Season of the Witch lacked any connective tissue with its predecessors and strayed too far from the formula fans had come to expect. In fact, Season of the Witch actually made the original Halloween a movie that exists within its storyline. Season of the Witch instead treads a line between Lovecraftian horror and corporate sci-fi dystopia, planting itself in California instead of Illinois and insinuating a terrifying global Halloween night conspiracy. The fourth and fifth films, churned out in 1988 and 89, attempt to carry on the saga of the Strodes and Michael Myers without Jamie Lee Curtis. A slew of new writers and directors dropped into the franchise, killing Laurie Strode off in an off-screen car accident and replacing her as the story focus with her newly invented 8-year-old daughter, an annoyingly cherubic little girl named Jamie. All three films are generic teen slashers with Spielbergian little kids and a raving pleasance at their centers. Ultimately, nothing that happens in Halloween 4 or 5 really matters, however, because the sixth film promptly kills Jamie to make way for a new set of victims. One thing that is interesting about these films is Haddonfield's increasing self-awareness as a tacit character in the tale of Michael Myers. The police force evolves into an overeager, hapless army pitting itself against Michael's eventual return, while the townspeople, believing he's finally gone, turn him into a proper urban legend. The latest trilogy returns to this idea, expanding on it from these three films in a way most of the other Halloween films haven't. The main draw of this misbegotten middle part of the Halloween saga is Pleasance's drive. Loomis. Armed only with a pathetic and paltry pistol, Loomis seems to be the only character capable of facing down Michael again and surviving to tell the tale. And Pleasance always manages to walk a line between stone-cold sanity and madness that keeps Loomis vulnerable and endearing even at his campiest. Unfortunately, Pleasance died after filming but before the release of the sixth film, which is dedicated to his memory. And without him, there really was only one other person who could keep the Halloween flame burning. Director Steve Miner wisely brought Jamie Lee Curtis back to the franchise for age 20 by completely ignoring anything that happened in films 3 through 6 aside from the barely mentioned car accident used to kill off Laurie Strode to begin with. Here we learn she faked her own death, moved out to California, and became a prep school head under an assumed identity. Michael tracks her down anyway, just in time for her son's 17th birthday, and the madness begins again. Two things are apparent when you watch H20. The first is how much the 90s did to advance the treatment of women in horror films, and how markedly different adult Laurie is from her tepid, terrified younger self. Though she's still clearly traumatized from what happened to her, she's also built an amazing life for herself as an academic and a mother, and now she's prepared to do battle to keep that life. H20 is the first film where any of the women targeted by Michael, or indeed any of the victims at all, really attempt to fight back instead of just running around in terror for most of the movie. And the film goes a step further by having Laurie choose to stay and confront Michael even when given the opportunity to escape. Halloween is fully aware of what Halloween films do best. Let Michael Myers terrify viewers as he conducts his regularly scheduled eerie rampage through Haddonfield. Hope you all enjoyed this journey into the horror of Michael Myers. But before you all go, do me a big favor, especially if you enjoy horror and many other types of interesting fun content. Hit that bell notification and leave me a comment. Let's spark a conversation. But most of all, subscribe.